Okay, so this is such a big and challenging topic for so many families. And separation anxiety is a clinical condition that goes by quite a few names. We're going to use separation anxiety, abbreviated as SA, and separation related behaviors, SRB, for this evening. Now, it's good to note that we're going to use the term anxiety pretty casually here this evening, but true separation anxiety is a clinical condition that has to be diagnosed by a veterinarian. So good things to keep in mind. So separation anxiety is defined as undesirable behaviors which only occur when the owner is absent. A study by Flanagan and Dodman looked at behavior from two groups of dogs, one group that experienced separation anxiety and the other did not. They found 4 behaviors that significantly distinguished the SA group from the non-SA group. And these were destruction, vocalizing, which included barking, whining, and screaming, inappropriate elimination or going to the bathroom in the home, and drooling excessively, along with vomiting and or diarrhea. Now, if you'll note the numbers on those groups, we were seeing, comparatively speaking, high percentages of separation anxiety dogs with very low percentages of non-SA dogs. And in fact, drooling, vomiting, and diarrhea, no dogs that did not experience separation anxiety exhibited that behavior. So it was very, very clearly associated with separation anxiety. One of the interesting things that came out of this study was that there were several behaviors that are often thought to be related to separation anxiety, such as following the owner around or being a Velcro dog, pre-departure cues like signs of stress when owners were putting on shoes or coats or grabbing their keys or things like that, very excessive and excitable greetings upon return, or disinterest in eating while they were left alone. But if you look at the comparison between the SA dogs and non-SA dogs, those numbers were pretty close. There were not significant differences between them. So just because they were a Velcro dog did not indicate they would necessarily have separation anxiety. This is really important to note. So if you are seeing some of these behaviors from your dog, but they aren't also showing you at least one of the significantly associated separation anxiety behaviors, it's unlikely they're suffering from true separation anxiety. There are several conditions that may appear similar to separation anxiety, but they may occur independently from it, such as noise phobias. Now, these dogs may experience fear and anxiety symptoms, including barking. It may include escape behaviors, and these phobias may be linked to their genetics, to any past trauma or other things in their medical history, and it may be linked to pain. So if they're experiencing pain, noises can be scary, especially if they feel like they're threatened by them or they can't escape from them or something like that. Now, these noise phobias are usually related to sounds that are occurring in the environment, and this can include sounds that are in the home, including ultrasonic sounds from electronics equipment that may be out of our hearing range, so you may not even know they're happening, to sounds that occur outside the home, such as animals outside, people or vehicles moving by, other kind of scary or unexplained noises. All of those can contribute to noise phobias. It's also good to note that an estimated 88% of pets with noise phobias were also experiencing some degree of separation anxiety, although they are not always seen together. Another similar condition is going to be confinement anxiety. This is similar to claustrophobia in humans. The goal for your pet is to escape whatever confined space they're in, usually a crate. It's often indicative of incomplete or unsuccessful crate training, where maybe the crate was used as punishment or something like that. And we might also see this in pets who are simply new to a home, who may not yet be comfortable with confinement because they're so overwhelmed by everything else going on. One of the, I suppose, nice things about that is that the behavior may reduce with training or by changing the confinement parameters. For example, we may not need the dog in a crate. Maybe they do better if they're just left in a single room or gated off with barriers and have access to a wider space. So some of this is more easily manageable. So if your dog doesn't seem to be experiencing separation anxiety, what could it be? Well, it might just be that our dog needs more stimulation, and that may take the form of training, different types of enrichment, which we'll dive into later, or social engagement. It may also be that our pet is frustrated and trying to communicate their needs. Now, frustration may be due to developmental age or maturity, or it may be due to training. We want to remember that our dogs don't speak human any better than we speak dog. And the training methods that we're using to teach them how to be successful in their homes, what behaviors are valuable, which ones are not valuable, that's going to make a really big difference in how successful they are. We want to make sure our training sets them up for success and doesn't just focus on where they're struggling. So hopefully some of you are maybe feeling a little bit better about how your pet is coping with separation, but if you aren't, don't worry, you are in good company. It's estimated that 25 to 55% of pet dogs are believed to show signs of separation anxiety, and in the US, that's going to be about 50% of dogs is 38 million pets. And this number may be underestimated, which we'll jump into in just a moment. And we're going to start that part of the conversation by asking a question. Does your dog already experience separation-related behaviors? And if they don't, are you sure? Let's talk about invisible SA and SRB. A quote from Palazzini et al. Is that separation-related problems may therefore be underestimated if elimination does not occur, destruction is absent or minor, and if no one hears the dog vocalize. Kind of like that saying, if the bear poops in the woods, right? Well, this question is, if your dog barks and no one is there to hear it, is it separation anxiety? How do we know? Record your pet when they're left alone. This is especially true if the only symptoms that your dog is showing of SA may be some barking or whining or small sounds, and maybe they're drooling, or maybe they're panting, things that you're less likely to see evidence of when you return home. So it's always good if you have any suspicions that your pet may be experiencing any separation-related behaviors while you're gone, that you record them and try to get a feel for what's actually happening when you leave the home. So why does separation anxiety occur? Something we commonly hear is that spoiling leads to separation anxiety, whether it's letting our pets in our beds or on our furniture, letting them come with you everywhere outside the home, giving them too many treats or lots of human food. And luckily, we have seen repeatedly through research, including this study by McCrave, that spoiling does not cause separation anxiety. And we have this one study here, but this has been replicated repeatedly throughout the research over the years, which is really nice to know. You're not going to cause separation anxiety by spoiling your pet. So feel free to give them that deli meat and take them to Starbucks with you. That's not going to cause this behavior. Some things that may be related to separation anxiety is genetics. We know that genetics can be causal for separation anxiety. They found some haplotypes and other genetic markers that may be associated with SRB. And it's important to note that genetic predisposition does not mean that these behaviors are untreatable. Our genes are always turning on and turning off and doing different things based on our experiences. And there's a couple papers to back this up. Other contributing factors to separation anxiety can be the environment, like we've already discussed with noise phobias, for example. What external factors might be causing your dog stress? It could be caused by multiple homes, for example, an animal who's been adopted out to several homes, or even moves with the same family. So if you're moving from place to place, those changes can just be very challenging for our pets, because not only is it a change in the environment, it's oftentimes also a change in routine. Speaking of changes to routine, any significant changes there can also trigger separation anxiety. And this could be daily routines, work schedules, school schedules, things like that. It could be family composition, adding or losing family members, whether due to moves or school or births, deaths, different things like that. Significant changes to lifestyle. And then, of course, traumatic experiences. If our pets experience something very scary while left alone, that can lead to SA as well. We have a bunch of different tools that we can utilize to help set our pets up for success. And we'll go through each of these in more detail in the next portion of our presentation. We need to evaluate their behavior, identify what their limits and tolerances are, communicate with our communities to set up for success. We'll talk quite a bit about management, and we'll spend some time discussing training in a general sense as well. So starting with evaluating our pets' behaviors. It's really important when determining what our pet's separation behavior looks like to set up different recording devices. And luckily, there are so many different things available to us, whether it's old cell phones, laptops, tablets, dedicated recording devices. There are so many different things that we can use, many of which are, again, accessible or affordable. You want to set up these recording devices in any spaces that your pet has access to. And to the best of your ability, set it up so you can really see as much of the space as possible to see how your pet is interacting with their environment. Once you're reviewing these videos, unless you're watching live, take notes of what you're seeing and hearing. So ideally, your recorders will also have sound. Look for progressions of behaviors. How does their behavior change from when you leave to when you return, or even right before you leave to shortly after you get back. It could be a longer window than just being gone. Where is it occurring? Where in the home are we seeing these behaviors? Are they just in the room by the doorway, or are they kind of all over the house? Take note of those things. Are there any outside influences? Does the barking start when you leave and the neighbor's dog starts going in response to you leaving? Or when the mail shows up? Or when your neighbor walks their dog? Or whatever it might be. Take note of those things. If there's a school nearby, is it when there's lots of noise outside and people coming and going? Just be aware of all those outside influences that we, who are conditioned to them, might not normally notice. Identify your pet's limits. When does this behavior start in relation to you leaving? Which again could be before you leave, could be after you leave. How long does it last? And then if it stops, what stops it? What in the behavior changes that stops that behavior? And take note of their behavior if they stop. Are they, stopping the barking after 10 minutes and then just settling down for a nap or playing with a toy? Or are they just sitting there? Are they kind of shut down, or are they relaxed? Look for some of those signals and some of those differences in their body language. We recognize that separation anxiety doesn't just impact us and our families. It's really important to communicate with your community. Communicate with your neighbors just as a courtesy, but also as a way to gather information. They might be able to tell you about your dog's barking behavior while you're gone, or other things they may observe depending on how close your homes are, what they can see, and so forth. It's also going to give you a chance to start feeling out potential options for your management plan. And we'll get into this in just a moment, but this will be super, super important for the majority of dogs with SA. Can your neighbors be your allies instead of just kind of annoyed at your dog who's barking all day? Can you reach out to local family and friends and look into daycare options or dog walking options as well? Let's dig into that further. When it comes to dogs with separation anxiety, it is critical to never leave them alone for longer than they can tolerate. Now, what we mean by tolerate is less time than it takes to elicit a fearful response, which for some dogs might just be a few seconds. So this is the time when they are still calm before they start to get nervous or scared or react in some inappropriate way. Again, for some dogs, this may literally be 1 to 2 seconds. And don't worry, this is just a starting point. Your training is going to help you move past this. You're not going to be there forever. So as you can imagine, for these dogs, if we can't leave for longer than they can tolerate, that strong management plan is going to be absolutely critical. Now, be creative. Some pets may be comforted only by the presence of their primary person or persons, whereas others may be comforted by the presence of any number of trusted humans that they know. This is one of the clinical differences between separation anxiety and isolation distress, which we didn't go into in detail today. The label of separation anxiety is used for both conditions, but if your dog is not experiencing isolation distress, you can be creative and just reach out and find your village. If you're just running some errands, do you have a neighbor that your dog can hang out with for a few hours? If you're going to be away all day, who in your circle works from home? Or in some cases, does your workplace allow you to flex? Can you be at home for periods of time? Could your dog accompany you to work? In some cases, are there ways to kind of make that schedule work a bit better for you? Who is home on their days off while you're working? Who do we know who's retired? Who do we know who's a house parent? Find folks in your circle or your neighborhood who can be available to help you, whether it's for short periods of time, if you're just running errands, or for longer days away from home. Nextdoor is a great resource for this. And I know some neighborhoods have Facebook communities as well. So reach out to folks. There are people who are willing to help you. Another great option is, does your dog have dog friends? If they do, arrange play dates. Or again, if your dog can do well in daycare, bring them to daycare once or twice a week. A quick note on daycare, even if your dog is experiencing separation anxiety, daycare every day of the week is not a good option. They will get cranky, they will get overtired. We don't want to do that to our dogs. So daycare 1 to 3 times a week is sufficient. Come up with other management plans for the rest of the week if at all possible. Or arrange for your daycare not to have them, in the big group for more than a little bit at a time. So yeah, it can seem like a lot of work, but environmental management is huge. It's going to reduce the signs of SRB in our dogs. It, by its nature, is going to reduce the strain on you and members of your family, and it is required for any of the following training protocols to work. Really, really important. So when we're talking about management, we do want to make sure that we are addressing confinement, because being able to accept confinement is a really important skill. Whether it's because one day our pets will travel, or maybe we move, or maybe there's an emergency like a fire and we have to evacuate. There's all different reasons why being able to tolerate a crate, even for short periods of time, the groomer, the vets, is going to be a really important skill to have. It's critical when you're doing your crate training that it doesn't feel like punishment and it isn't used to suppress behavior. This is especially true for dogs with SA and SRB, because putting a dog in a crate who is uncomfortable in that crate when we're trying to suppress behavior, for example, destruction, escape behaviors, and so forth, this can lead to injury or worsening of those behaviors. Really important to do that correctly. So on that same note about confinement, this is a quote from a research article from Palestrini et al. They said, in our study, cage confinement seems to increase the discomfort response. Behaviors such as yawning and lip licking were performed significantly more by caged dogs than dogs allowed to run freely or confined in a room. And when you see a science paper that uses the term significantly, they mean more likely than chance. So it's scientifically significant that we see that. So if your dog is currently at home in a crate, maybe they're not chewing their way out of the crate, but again, are you sure they're comfortable? Could there be invisible SA going on? Set up a camera and just record. See how they do. Make sure your pet is actually comfortable in that crate and isn't panting, drooling, or experiencing other forms of SA. There are, as we mentioned before, several alternatives to confinement. That could mean access to one or several rooms in the home. Do your best to dog-proof it. You could be using gates or X-pens to more loosely confine. And in some cases, for dogs, removing the crate from the space they're in by itself can decrease anxiety and reduce destructive behaviors, if they'd previously been confined and trying to do damage that way. So test it. Confine them one day and leave them free the next. And remember that when we say day, we don't necessarily mean all day. We mean whatever period of time is appropriate for your dog at that time. And just take note. Again, we're going to be recording it. Does the behavior change? How does your dog do confined versus not confined? So moving on in our management conversation, we want to take a moment and talk about enrichment. Enrichment and feeder toys and things of that nature are phenomenal tools that we can use throughout our training and management plans for all types of behaviors. That said, they may not be great when paired directly with separation anxiety as treatment or management for separation anxiety. What we mean by that is if you provide enrichment right before you leave, they can begin to associate the presentation of enrichment with your absence, which means enrichment starts to predict you leaving and cue separation behaviors, maybe even prior to you leaving in some cases. In other cases, what we were seeing is that the management of the separation anxiety would only last as long as the toy. So folks might say, oh, my dog can be alone for 15 or 20 minutes, but then they start panicking or barking or whatever it might be, trying to escape. And when they looked into this question further, they found out that, oh, that's when they finish their bone or they finish their puzzle toy or they finish whatever. So we want to be really aware of how we're using enrichment. Instead of providing it just with absences, provide it throughout the day as part of your regular everyday routine. I always recommend feeding meals via enrichment, especially with dogs who tend to eat quickly. Meals based in enrichment can be a great way of slowing them down, burning a whole bunch of energy. It's a really nice way to make it a consistent part of the day that's unlinked with other things. You can do enrichment after training sessions, which just on its own is a form of enrichment. You can do it before walks. You can do enrichment when you're busy. Burn energy without correlating it with your absence. It will still make them a bit more mellow when you leave, but it won't be directly related. So you get the benefits without those side effects. Let's talk about medication. So far, we've been discussing external management of our dog's environment. Medication manages their internal environment, and it's not a last resort. We don't want to think about medication as a last resort because for some dogs, it's necessary to help them succeed, to help them get to a point where you can actually move forward. So I'm going to share with you a quote from Appleby and Pujamakers. And what they said is medication should always be used as an adjunct to behavioral therapy as a means of achieving homeostasis, internal homeostasis, more quickly, thereby increasing the likelihood of behavior therapy being successful. So this kind of goes in part with what the FDA says about medication. They approve it as part of a behavior training plan. Medication and behavior training for separation anxiety are meant to be used together. For dogs who need medication, you usually can't just use medication. You need to be using both together. They're meant to be a two-part process. Now, not every dog will require it, but for those that do, it isn't a last resort. And of course, medication can and should only be prescribed by a veterinarian or a veterinary behaviorist who is a vet with a behavior specialty. Okay, let's talk training. So remember that separation anxiety is equivalent to a panic attack. It's scary. Our goal is to address our pet's anxiety, not the symptoms of that anxiety. We're not just addressing the destruction. We're not just addressing the barking. That's not what it's about. It's about those underlying causes that are showing up as separation anxiety. It's critical to remember that punishment and behavioral suppression can worsen these behaviors, and our methods make a really big difference. We want to use positive reinforcement and desensitization. Remember, our goal is not to show our pets what isn't working and stop what we don't want to see. It's to build the behaviors we do want to see, help our pets succeed, and set them up for that success, and help them move forward in ways that make all of us feel good. It's also really important to note that prognosis for separation anxiety is excellent with consistent training and management. And if you are feeling like you are out of hope and out of spoons or whatever else, you can do it. Owners should be encouraged that it is never too late and a case is never too bad to contemplate treatment, because these factors do not affect prognosis, and treatment is relatively straightforward for most owners, and that comes from Sherman and Mills. So good news, there is hope, lots of it. So diving back into our training, we want to be careful about pairing food with our returns. And this is something that we see kind of in, less modern methodologies for training separation anxiety, was using food with coming and going. We're trying not to pair food with our return these days. And the reason we're doing that is because adding food draws more attention to our absence, which we don't want to do. It may seem successful while you're working within the range of your dog's tolerances, but eventually that food reward is going to be less valuable than the absence you are asking them to tolerate. So what I mean by that is the food is great until you are gone long enough that the food doesn't matter anymore. That's not, and then you're going to kind of feel stuck and not know what to do next. So we want to take that food out of that return to kind of minimize that situation. So again, you want to practice being absent in a non-contingent manner, where being absent is not correlated with food, and the two are unconnected. If our dog is expecting food, what you're going to see in your training videos as you record your dog's behavior is they're going to start waiting at the door in many cases. which means they may not be performing normal dog behaviors like resting, playing, eating or drinking normally, or engaging with their environment in other ways, like looking out the window, exploring, sniffing, different things like that. So sometimes if we see dogs who aren't eating while you're gone, it may be because they're waiting for you to get back because they're expecting food, or big exciting returns or something like that. So we want to practice our absences without food and instead focus on working within your pet's comfort and tolerance range. That way they aren't as stressed by you leaving. So again, we're going to dive into that practicing absences. Determine your pet's tolerances. And again, this could be seconds. This will be illustrated by calm, soft, loose, relaxed behaviors. We'll send you some handouts in a webinar all about how to read for those signs. You're going to leave them for a period of time that's within that tolerance window, which is a second or more. That's appropriate for your pet. And what this process looks like is you leave for that period of time, come back, hang out for a few minutes, leave again, basically just repeat that process. You're going to work on this routine 5 days a week, for 20 to 30 minutes at a time. And you're always going to stay within your dog's tolerance, which will shift as you're going through this training process. Something really cool to note is in this study by Farabacher, they showed, interestingly, the dog that had the highest percentage of successful trials also had the owner who increased the departure duration the slowest and had the greatest number of short departures. The authors concluded that systematic desensitization was the critical component for successful treatment, and that counter-conditioning and other behavioral advice did not influence the behavioral outcome. Now, oftentimes, you'll hear us as trainers talk about desensitization and counter-conditioning being combined in what we call DSCC, but you can separate those processes. And for separation anxiety, desensitization is what we're working on. We're not necessarily adding in counter-conditioning. So we will send you an article all about desensitization as part of the follow-up for this, but in case you are somewhat familiar with these terms, we are separating them out and using them as using one of the two separate training methods as opposed to both. Remember that each dog is different, right? We're all unique individuals. They're going to move at their own pace, and they're each going to require a unique training plan, especially for dogs with more moderate to severe separation anxiety. Especially in those cases, you're going to want to work with a specialist. And the specialists that we most often refer out to are those that have the designation of being a CSAT, or a Certified Separation Anxiety Trainer. These trainers have been through a program developed by Milena De Martini, who is a world-renowned specialist in separation anxiety and has a very rigorous training program. So to start summing all of this up and to kind of give you some ways to start thinking about this, if you already know that you're expecting a shift in your work routine, your schedules, maybe you're going back to work soon, plan ahead. Start practicing absences now. Record your dog's behavior to determine if there is any SA or SRB. Start increasing your daily enrichment as a general rule, and practice some environmental and community management. Have a general feel for who you might be able to reach out to if you do need some additional support for your pet. As far as additional training resources go, you can find a trainer online at Milena's website. She has a whole directory for CSATs. And there are two that we work with who are both local, and that's Tina Flores and Lynn Webb. There are also some self-guided online programs, one on Milena's website, which is called Mission Possible. And also a wonderful trainer named Nancy Tucker has a self-guided separation anxiety course on her website as well. You can always reach out to us here at San Diego Humane Society. We have over 40 different types of classes. We have our behavior helplines, we have our resource library, and much more. So you are always welcome to reach out to us there. We also have an extensive YouTube channel, both on the official San Diego Humane Society page, and we now have a community animal training YouTube channel as well, so you can search for us there. We do have a whole playlist filled with separation anxiety resources, and we will send you that as part of our follow-up. And then another resource that I really love is fearfreehappyhomes.com. They have a lot of great information about separation anxiety, what it is, what it isn't. They have information about noise phobias and confinement phobias. They have a whole bunch of different resources on SA and other challenging behaviors for our pets. So wonderful, wonderful resources there. So that's going to wrap up the bulk of our chat tonight. I wanted to make sure that we did leave some time for questions because this is a very broad and complex topic. So I'm going to go ahead and leave about the next 20 minutes open for chat and for your questions. And there's our helpline information if you do want to reach out to us. Thank you all so much. I'm going to go ahead and for now stop the share.